Doors to private property are broken down, furniture is thrown out of the house, forced demolition continues in Beijing. The most celebrated entrepreneur in China is suffering a series of blows. It's not the first time the Chinese Communist Party has tried to show him who's boss. An increasingly widespread power shortage in China demands that factories shut down. It's partly due to Beijing's retaliation against Australia. The U.S. Acting Secretary of Homeland Security says Americans are suffering and dying every day because of the Chinese Communist Party. And a UK general says the West needs to devise a long-term strategy to defend itself against the CCP's desire for expansion. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Thousands of Beijing families report having their homes forcibly destroyed by authorities. Doors to private property have been broken down daily, according to locals, before houses are torn down. NTD's Becky Zhou has the story.
Residents in one Beijing neighborhood are facing what many would call a nightmare. They live in Beijing's Xiangtang Cultural Village inside the Changping district. But now the regime is coercing them into moving out in the middle of winter. If they refuse, officials use other tactics to persuade them, like cutting off their water, heat, and electricity. Homeowners' names will also be added to a blacklist. Some residents took videos at the scene.
Look at all the violent officials who are forcing their way into houses without owners' permission. Many of them smashed all your windows.
Local officials now refuse to recognize home ownership deeds and certificates, which were previously granted by the same officials. Another video captured a citizen standing on the roof of his house, yelling,
"You sold us the house and now you're destroying it without any compensation. It's outrageous. You also have children and elderly family members. Can you force them to move out?"
The district's residential housing project was launched over 20 years ago by local authorities. Artists, singers, photographers, calligraphers, and veterans were invited and encouraged to move into the area. But now locals are watching demolition teams tear down their homes.
Look at this tragedy. These are all of our belongings. They forcibly and destructively removed our furniture. Our stuff is all scratched and dismantled.
Some homeowners say they plan to flee China to start a new life. Reporting by Becky Zhou, NTD News.
Now we turn to financial services company Ant Group, backed by Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba. Ant Group is suffering the latest in a string of heavy blows. That's after China's largest online payment service provider halted deposit services for several small banks on Friday. The move is in line with China's tightening of regulations in the financial sector. These financial products offer higher returns and lower entry thresholds to customers from larger state-run banks, while online services have attracted 1 billion customers and surpassing regional boundaries. Finance is one of the most tightly regulated sectors in China. The communist regime closely monitors every move private companies make and often begins to suppress them when they get too successful. This latest move isn't the first time the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, has tried to show Ant Group who's boss. Earlier this year, the group's initial public offering, or IPO, was blocked by the authorities just before it was launched. If launched, it would have become the world's largest IPO of its kind. The move was widely seen as retaliation over Alibaba head Jack Ma's criticism of the Chinese financial system. He said publicly that there's no risk in China's financial system because the country has no healthy financial system. He's also likened the way Chinese banks operate to how pawn shops function. His bold words prompted anger from regime leaders. Chinese officials familiar with the matter revealed that CCP head Xi Jinping personally made the decision to halt Ant Group's IPO. Ant Group is backed by shopping giant Alibaba. As a result of the connection, Chinese authorities also extended Ant Group's warning to the company. The regime last week took actions against 3 of the country's most influential internet companies. It fined them nearly $80,000 each for failing to report their past acquisition deals to the regime and for neglecting to get clearance first. Alibaba was one of them. The comparatively small penalty won't put much strain on the company's financials, but the regime's warning is clear. All private companies, no matter how large or successful, must remember that the regime is in charge. Alibaba's founder, Jack Ma, also recently endured a personal setback. The bidding process for a new construction project in China was suspended earlier this month. The new facility will eventually house a training school for entrepreneurs. Ma co-founded the school and is said to take up the post of school head upon its opening. The school, called Hupan College, is located in China's southwestern Yunnan province. In order to be accepted, potential students must have led an enterprise for at least 3 years, and that company's annual revenue must exceed $5 million. The program has been labeled as training classes and a club for millionaire entrepreneurs by Chinese media. Some say the CCP became concerned about the potential for so many wealthy and influential people to be gathering and exchanging ideas, prompting the project's suspension. Some Chinese netizens are blaming an increasingly widespread power shortage on Beijing's Australian coal sanctions. Large-scale electricity and water cutoffs are already taking their toll. NTD's Don Ma has the details.
Chinese authorities cut electricity to at least 4 cities in China's Guangdong province on Monday morning. Residents and businesses were not notified ahead of time. The sudden shutoff disrupted cell phone network signals and caused problems for hospitals, schools, and residential areas. A netizen said that some people were in the middle of showering when suddenly the water just stopped. Some were inside elevators, which they got stuck inside. Some lost digital files when computers shut down. The forced power cuts impacted major cities like Guangzhou and Shenzhen, among others. Guangzhou is China's third largest city and is home to 13 million residents. Shenzhen is one of the country's largest manufacturing cities. One Shenzhen resident told us that unannounced outages are actually a common occurrence in Shenzhen.
Some factories or large power-consuming factories are required not to work during the day. They take turns. Some are not allowed to work at night. They call it rationed use of electricity.
Officials also announced electricity rationing for other provinces. Earlier this month, notices explained that a threshold for power use had been reached, and there wasn't enough to go around. Provinces like Hunan and Zhejiang received the notices, among others. Residents also reported factories and businesses were shut down and traffic lights were turned off. Some blamed the deficiency in power on Russia's recent decision to restrict electricity exports to China. Russia reportedly reduced power exports by some 3 billion kilowatt hours of electricity to China. While one Zhejiang resident says he suspects the shortage of power is due to Beijing's sanctions on Australian coal imports.
Australian coal entered China and was detained by customs. It hasn't been able to pass the customs. This would cause the price of coal in China to rise and in extension affect the power supply.
6 months ago, Beijing started blocking Australian coal from entering its ports. Over $700 million worth of Australian coal has been sitting aboard ships along China's coast. This is Don Ma reporting, NTD News.
Acting Secretary of Homeland Security spoke at the Heritage Foundation. Americans are suffering and dying every day because of the Chinese Communist Party. NTD's Christina Kim brings us the story.
Acting Homeland Security Secretary Chad Wolf said the Chinese Communist Party attacks the legitimacy of our political system. This, as he spoke of the dangers of the CCP and outlined steps the Trump administration and Homeland Security have taken to combat their influence.
I cannot stress this point strongly enough. China threatens the livelihood, the prosperity, and well-being of each and every American. Your homes, your schools, your jobs, your retirement accounts, and your health are all at risk.
Wolf gave examples of how the CCP have used disinformation campaigns to mislead the American public, pressure political figures, shape American discourse in China's favor, and shift responsibility for the pandemic away from the CCP.
A 2017 U.S. Trade Representative report found that Chinese theft of American intellectual property cost our country as much as $600 billion each and every year.
According to Wolf, China Daily, a well-known mouthpiece for the party, paid millions of dollars to major American newspapers to print pro-Beijing supplements designed to look like real news articles. But under the Trump administration, the U.S. has been and will continue to take action. For example, Chinese students and researchers tied to their military will not be allowed to enter the States. After that notice, tens of thousands of students left to avoid detection. Before, CCP agents could have visas for up to 10 years. Now, it will be shortened to a maximum of 1 month. In 2019 alone, the DHS seized enough fentanyl to kill every American 4 times over. It was a part of efforts to intercept opioids and other drugs coming from China. And the US will be specifically welcoming refugees from Hong Kong. The DHS will soon release a plan to further work on these issues. Christina Kim, NTD News.
The Treasury is under fire for trying to soften President Trump's ban on some Chinese securities. His order protects U.S. investors from companies linked to the Chinese military.
The Financial Times reports the U.S. Treasury is trying to water down Trump's order banning investment in companies linked to the Chinese military. The Treasury is concerned that tough measures on Chinese companies will disrupt global financial markets. Conversely, national security policymakers and human rights advocates say that Americans shouldn't be funding the totalitarian regime. Last Friday, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin posted a tweet saying there is no disagreement between him and Mike Pompeo regarding the executive order. Minutes after that, Pompeo also denied there was any clash. The executive order highlights 35 blacklisted companies, including subsidiaries and affiliates. That means more than 140 companies will be affected. A person close to the matter told the Epoch Times that the alleged conflict could be over whether to include affiliates in the ban. Excluding affiliates could be a possible compromise. However, he said that would create a loophole. Majority stakeholders could reduce their stake to a minority amount to get around the ban. Reporting by Patrick Hayden, NTD News.
Lawmakers are on track to support spending $2 billion to remove Huawei equipment from U.S. networks. The funding is part of the $900 billion relief deal reached on Sunday.
The U.S. may soon take another major step against Chinese telecom giant Huawei. Congress reportedly wants to spend $2 billion to remove Huawei equipment from U.S. broadband networks. The measure will also target another Chinese tech firm, ZTE. The Trump administration says both companies have ties to the Chinese regime's military, a charge they deny. In June, the Federal Communications Commission formally announced the two companies as threats to national security. And earlier this month, the FCC required U.S. companies to rip and replace equipment from both firms. If passed, this week's virus relief bill will provide the final funds to empower companies to do so. In response, Huawei said the move will negatively affect connectivity for Americans. The $900 billion relief bill also includes billions of dollars to improve internet access for low-income Americans.
Now we take a look at a Chinese-owned company in the U.S. A Chinese-owned retail trading platform has become one of the fastest-growing companies of its kind in the U.S. Bloomberg reported the free trading app Webull has more than 2 million clients, 10 times more than last year. Webull's registration information on the FINRA website shows that it's headquartered on Wall Street in New York. Its chief executive officer is an American named Anthony Denier and owned by Fuma Holdings from China. It claimed it stores user data in the U.S. and follows the same regulations as any other U.S. brokerage firm. Webull's China ties has attracted some attention. Its owner, Fumi Technology, is located in southern Chinese Hunan province, established in 2016. Its founder, Wang Anchun, is a former head of China's retail giant Alibaba. Webull told Bloomberg the company sought a review of its ownership by the Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S., or CFIUS. It has prevented some Chinese-owned companies from expanding in the U.S. over national security concerns. But CFIUS decided in December not to launch a review. General Sir Nick Carter defined the present time as a moment of truth for Britain and its allies over whether it is possible for the democratic world to peacefully coexist with China. In his annual defense speech, he says the West needs to devise a long-term strategy to defend itself against Beijing's expansionism. He adds Britain may need to adopt a similar way of thinking to its authoritarian rivals in Russia and China to deny them the means to take over our way of life via cyber warfare. According to The Times, his comments reflect an emerging consensus that Beijing is engaging in warfare by stealth, the theme of another speech by Sir Nick last month. Beijing is eagerly pushing its central bank's digital currency. Earlier this month, China's biggest online platform announced it would be the first to use the digital currency. NTD's Xu Wenhui spoke to a China expert to break down the CCP scheme behind the move.
China's homegrown digital currency is one step closer to substituting cash. Major online platform JD.com first launched it as a payment tool earlier this month as part of its experimental program. Unlike Bitcoin, which is decentralized, China's digital currency is issued and monitored by the CCP-controlled People's Bank of China. According to Beijing, digital currency can help eliminate corruption since every transaction is traceable. But NTD China Affairs analyst Mr. Tong Jingyuan says digital currency will only take this corruption to a new level because the corruption is rooted in the CCP's absolute power and lack of supervision.
For people of power at different levels within the system, it's more convenient for them to use digital currency engage in corruption. It's just a click away.
For regular citizens, when the blockchain technology goes hand in hand with central bank control, it can significantly violate their privacy. Every single asset and transaction will be firmly in the hands of the government.
This can be said to be another invisible chain that the digital totalitarian regime imposes to enslave their people.
The currency change will impact Chinese society in many ways. According to Mr. Tong, the move towards digital currency is a process to empty private wealth. This is particularly helpful for the government in an economic crisis.
We know that many Chinese people don't trust the government, thus many hide their assets in various ways. However, the change of currencies will force all of the hidden wealth to come to the surface.
Another concern is that digital currency can become a powerful tool for the planned economy, more powerful than any of the tools from the past. Back in the 1950s to 1980s in China, the scarce supply of goods generated different kinds of coupons, serving as a pass to buy food, cooking oil, cloth, coal, soap, and even bicycles. Authorities distributed the coupons. No coupon, no right to purchase, even if you had money. Mr. Tong compares China's digital currency to an all-purpose coupon.
It means that the regime can absolutely control everyone's wallet when the regime wants to. All your payments and purchases must obey government plans.
JD.com's boss, Richard Liu, once depicted a communist society he believes can be realized in his generation. He says by then, quote, all companies will be state-owned and China will need only one e-commerce company. Mr. Tong sees it as a reflection of the CCP scheme.
He's actually confirming in a way that Chinese digital currency is a useful tool to achieve digital totalitarianism. That is to say, all companies belong to the CCP, and every piece of wealth is owned and distributed by the CCP. People are simply slaves of the communist totalitarianism.
Zhou Xiaochuan, a former governor of the People's Bank of China, said the major design feature of the digital yuan is to weaken the influence of the US dollar. Mr. Tong believes this is mere wishful thinking because it lacks the support of the strength of the real economy. He says due to factors like the pandemic and the trade war, the current economic situation in China has hit an historic low. The CCP's wolf warrior diplomacy, dishonest behavior in world trade, and lack of respect for the rules has brought China's credit to a record low. Reporting by Xu Wenhui, NTD News.
And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you tomorrow.